We start with the safety aspects where you have analytic elements, AI, being able to help mitigate risks from just a safety feature across a corporate campus, an industry where you're being able to aggregate and look at those things in a specific location with the details necessary to realize these things are, slips and falls in this location have cost us this much. It's happened this many times, and this is the analysis behind it. I would also say that integrating the human reporting element into an intelligence apparatus is critical, and being able to push that information at the speed of technology to be able to shift resources in the time of crisis to inform your security professionals at the speed of technology is invaluable.
Welcome to the riskadvisor.com podcast. I'm Sal Lafreri. I'm here with my good friend and co-host, Jim Henry. Before we begin, we'd like to remind each of you to subscribe to the show and push that like button for us. Please remember that your comments are important, and to be able to get folks to build up a listening audience is really critical, and we'd really love to get a larger following. So today's topic, security planning for civil disobedience. What's the new normal? Well, for starters, let me say this. We are not getting political at all in this conversation. This is not our intent. What we really want to talk about are what are those issues that corporate leadership and security leadership has to be aware of. What do they have to deal with? How do they react? How do they respond? Those are the things that we really want to talk about today. So, Jim, at the risk of getting political, which we don't want to do. Right?
Well, you lasted for what? That was a good minute.
Normally, it's at this point of the show where I start to apologize for things that you may say. So we'll talk about with the current issues that we got, right? With the funding the police. We're looking at a greater reliance on private security. We're looking at the delay in potential response. I think this show, and especially with what's going on today in the world, and especially with the trial and the subsequent trials that'll be coming up, I think this is a critical topic for us to be talking about and how we go about planning. What do you think about all of this?
Well, I think that, it's not only planning for civil disobedience, it's planning for uncivil disobedience. It's not enough to get some of these court cases the way that the way that the left has been lobbying, because it appears that the chaos, there's almost an addiction to it at this point. And, that little Freudian slip there by LeBron with that tweet, that really showed, to me a lot of what's, underlying. There is a segment of the society at this point that is anxious to just keep pushing and pushing and pushing the envelope. So, there was I think some thought that, well, if they see some action now by the new administration and whatnot, and some, and some decisions, coming down, and some movement and some reforms and whatnot, that will be, that'll be adequate to to diffuse or even eliminate, some of the civil disobedience or uncivil disobedience. Yeah. I don't think so. The shoot, ready, aim mentality now, with people getting fired because they dare to say, well, let's just go through due process. The governor here in New York's allowed to say that for himself, but nobody else can say it. So, so am I getting political?
And unfortunately,
I'm just stating fact. At this point, that we have to be expecting that there's going to be, anarchy going forward because it is a means to an end. It is an end to itself, not just a means to an end. And that's very unfortunate, but we gotta face it. It's fact. There's too many examples of it.
So all of the intelligence information that gets generated and all of the stuff that's put into the papers, all of the information overload that we get today that's coming out is a major part of what we really want to talk about today. And I think we got the guest that we have today is probably the best example of someone who we could bring on who can actually explain this and is a true expert in his field. And today we have with us Joshua Skule. As a senior vice president, Joshua Skule is responsible for enhancing the risk advisory and consulting services division as a leading national and global provider of differentiating consulting, investigations, and protective services. Just with the first line, I can understand why you came from government. I mean, it's because everybody's with these long titles. Skule joins Allied Universal after a distinguished 21-year career in the FBI, where he was recently the executive assistant director for the intelligence leading the organization's intelligence branch. In this role, he served as the strategic leader of the FBI's intelligence program with centralized authority, responsibility, and oversight for all of the Bureau's intelligence work. In addition, he managed a global workforce of 5,000 personnel and a national intelligence program budget of over $3 billion. I can go on and on and on, but I will say that he graduated from the Naval Academy with a bachelor's degree in political science. He was a United States Marine captain and led teams in multiple challenging deployments around the world. In 2017, he was a recipient of the Presidential Rank Award for Meritorious Service. Joshua, welcome to the show, and more importantly, thank you for your service.
Thank you, Sal. I'm happy to be here.
So let's jump right into this. With everything that we're seeing from the civil disobedience, civil unrest, and everything that we sort of touched on within the first 2 minutes, what do you see as the biggest challenges facing security world today?
I would say that today it's the numerous challenges in a reactionary standpoint. So when you talk about the protests of 2020, while some of those could have been anticipated, many could not. And then you have the influence of social media, which has information and disinformation in it, and being able to separate the wheat from the chaff and what is going to actually impact the risk grading for a particular company. Being able to get that information to decision makers in a timely fashion that is accurate and actionable is a huge challenge for a security apparatus. And then, of course, once you have those actions, how do you shift the resources necessary, because you only have so much spent in your budget, in order to protect your brand, your people, and your property?
That's true. But so as a security, as the end user, right, you're in essence your clientele.
Sure.
How does one account for that large amount of information and disinformation, and how do you start separating all of that? How do you know what to react to and what not to?
So first of all, I mean, it has to be tied into a company's risk matrix. How much risk are they willing to tolerate on a specific instance? Where is their appetite for that? Where does that align with the company's goals and objectives to make sure that they're profitable? First, you have to have, in my opinion, huge import of today is intelligence analysts and somebody dedicated to making sure that they are looking at the information that is going to be most impactful for a company. And there's a host of information platforms out there that can get you that information. It's having the dedicated resource to make sure that they are analyzing it, that they know what the requirements are for the security apparatus and the business enterprise, and to be able to move at the speed of technology.
Well, you bring up a strong point. It's not necessarily everybody's got all of the capability to get a lot of the intelligence information in. It's how do you separate that out and analyze it? Just because you get a huge data dump doesn't mean that you're informed.
That's correct. And if I could, just a minute, in the way I think about it, you have a lot of people generalized intelligence, right? you have a lot of information. The intelligence comes through the eyes of somebody who is analytical. So I'll give you an example. Social media was tweeting or pushing out information last year on a corner in LA. Police are surrounded and squad cars burning. Well, until somebody actually got a hold of the sergeant that was in there, he said, "There's nobody on the corner, nobody." Right there was an element trying to incite protests in and around that area, but there was nothing going on at that moment. But the power of social media, you can move that information and cause discontent and malice via those platforms. And there's a couple. So if you don't have somebody that's analyzing, connected, and understands what is going to impact a particular company or industry, you could be at a disadvantage.
Well, that kind of highlights that cliche: a picture's worth 1,000 words. So video surveillance, is really valuable when you're trying to filter out, disinformation and whatnot from those that are trying to, incite an incident. And so sharing that video, in public spaces between some of these public-private partnerships now, between local businesses and town center systems and public video systems, really, really important now to get ahead of the misinformation.
I couldn't agree with you more, Jim. I mean, being able to aggregate the amount of information, separate it, and all at the speed of technology, and get that to decision is critical, especially in a time of crisis.
And that's a real challenge right now, because there's a lot of pressure for cost savings by commercial enterprises and whatnot. With all the shutdowns that we've had from COVID, and boy, oh boy, that this is not the time to be letting up on that, just because they haven't had a lot of people back in the workplace and and what have you. When people start coming back in there, to be cutting back on some of the electronic tools and surveillance and whatnot, that those sensory elements, even more important now that they don't have as deep and broad a reliance on public, on police departments, for their response or for their surveillance. So, communicating that to the private enterprises, that that's a very important tool, for them to protect themselves and to insulate them from chasing, fool's gold, with regards to some misinformation that they're seeing very inexpensively on their mobile phones. They could blow a lot of resources and possibly get themselves into trouble, by responding to those decoys.
I agree. There are capabilities today, and I think that we have to continue to push the envelope on what are economies of scale. Does partnerships help conserve cost and provide the necessary intelligence information for a client? We do that for a host of clients where just take everybody's GSOC is not the same. Everybody's intelligence or information apparatus is not the same. But you can waste resources by chasing social media, investigative security that could make you vulnerable without the right crisis planning in place.
Right. So we'll take our first break here, and then we'll get into some of the logistics of how to address this problem. You're listening to the Risk Advisor podcast, hosted by myself, Jim Henry, and Sal Lafreri. We invite you to comment on our blog at theriskadvisor.com and subscribe to us and follow us on our social media. If you are interested in having one or both of us speak at an upcoming event or would like to consult with us, please go to our webpage at theriskadvisor.com to set that up. How about putting the real turd on the table? Planning for riots. Things to consider, response plans, and of course, then the optics of how you respond to it are all things you need to take into
protests. They're exuberant protests. They're not riots.
So I think there's a couple of elements that have to go into this, right? We've seen extended riots out of Portland. We've seen peaceful protests and other locations across the U.S. You have elements in what have started as peaceful protests that have turned violent and caused vandalism and hurt some people, and then all of that can really materialize very, very quickly. But there's also a planning element to that, to many of them, and so there's an ability to get out in front. I think in the planning for a company is the evaluations. What's the risk to my property, my people, and my brand? And if I shut down for a day, what is that negatively impact me more or less than risking the damage that my shop could have, my company could have, or potentially even putting my employees at risk by mandating being at work. I think there is an ability for companies to work remotely. I also will tell you that we've had a huge uptick in employment of off-duty police officers. But again, depending on the scenario, sometimes those folks get recalled as well. But we've been able to successfully mitigate a lot of risk by having off-duty law enforcement on site for some of these companies. It also gives you the ability to actually it makes employees feel a little bit better having those resources there. And we
does this planning now? I mean, it's one thing to plan to shut down for a day or two, to let the crisis hopefully blow over and be quiet. But what we saw in Portland was, not confronting it, led to months of this. It just, I mean, how do you deal with that? If you don't have the support of the local government, and law enforcement, how can you plan for that? When you're talking about, especially after all these shutdowns, when you're talking about tolerating this for an indeterminate amount of time.
So thankfully, I mean, from my viewpoint, that you bring up Portland, but that is, one locale. We didn't see in every single city the continued unrest that we saw in Portland. We saw protests go on for a couple of days last year, but not to the length of Portland. So again, it's an evaluation on, what is the impact of the business? Are they actually targeting the business? What is actually going on the ground? There is an element to media reporting that needs to be, there needs to be additional factors going in, not just the open source. And then working with business leaders to determine how do you want to tackle this, and what is the security spend that you want to allocate, knowing that we're going to have, especially on a national company, a global company, knowing that we're going to have other aspects to these threats across the U.S. probably.
Well, the longer term actions would appear, and just kind of following the current developments here, would appear to be, targeting businesses now that are not, basically succumbing to the blackmail of support our causes openly, or we're going to call you out. We're going to boycott you. We've seen that now, with the pressure on, some big tech companies and some other commercial enterprises to overtly come out and take political stands, irrespective of whether there's due process going on, for a legal case or what have you. And for those businesses that to say, we're not gonna do that. We're not going to become political. I think, we've had a number of them the last day or two, came out and got called out for that just by saying we're not going to be political. And, that's why we really have an unknown situation where, we may see longer term events like, hopefully not as bad as Portland, but, not dissimilar if you're going to have those kinds of actions against companies that aren't taking those political stands.
Josh, let me ask you this question. We've seen, obviously, the protests. We've seen things go on for a period of time and the effects that it's having in corporations. But taking it down to a much more, lower level or grassroots level, is the security professionals, there was always the reliance upon law enforcement to be, in essence, the first responders. And today, the role of the security professional is taking more of the first responders sort of role to be able to, to be that first line of defense. And I think we're asking a lot more of that security professional of having to do that. Have you seen, what do you think about that change in that role with them with respect to, demonstrations and protests?
I think it's an evolution of what was going on in society. I wouldn't say that they're the first responder, because that has certain aspects to it, in mitigating those things. But I think, having, a professional security force that's able to deter in some of these is critical. I would say that the strain on police departments is tremendous today. They're under an immense amount of pressure, and there's almost 1 million police officers in this country. Vast majority of them trying to protect all of us, right? Doing the right thing. And there, some aspects of that unfortunately have taken a different turn. I think so having a professional security force that can be a deterrence, partnering with an organization that has connectivity to law enforcement outside of just maybe the immediate locale of a corporation that can rely on differing resources and liaison to provide that threat information and help pre-position resources is helpful to many. But I think that you're going to see a consistent evolution of what is required. And then it'll just be a calculated determination on how and what the policies and procedures are going to call for a particular corporation.
Well, private security is definitely a people business, people-centric. Sure. So you need to have good people there. So now that many of the municipalities are having difficulty drawing in and hiring, new talent, and they're losing a lot to either leave, leaving their posts or to retirement. Are you finding it in private security easier to hire now because some of those people, some of those security professionals feel they actually might have more latitude and more support on the private side than on the public side?
No, I wouldn't say that we've seen that shift in the way that you're talking about it, right? We're seeing an increase in folks wanting more reactionary forces, more specialized. But I haven't seen the shift from as the way you articulated. Because they're leaving law enforcement, we're having an easier time of recruiting on the professional security side.
Do you think that might? I mean, I'm not in it as close to it as you are, but my sense is, trying to put myself in the position of some of those that have committed themselves to that career, rather than leaving it entirely. I don't think that's I think it's possible that we may see that trend going forward.
Well, I think when you're former law enforcement, former military, going into, and we recruit heavily allied on the veteran side for a variety of reasons: experience, discipline, perspective. That's always been a gravitational pull because it's like-minded. And so could you see an aspect of that? You could. I would say that it also depends on what the skill sets a particular corporation is looking for. We have clients that have specialized skills on campus that help cement what is a first line of security professionals. Whether you want to call it a incident response team, critical incident response team that could help bolster a standing guard force. And we've seen folks have to employ those resources, somewhat what you're saying. I would say that's probably more of a rotational pull for law enforcement than it would be on a standard security professional.
We'll take our second break here, and then in the third segment, we'll try and do as good a job as we can in projecting, what the outlook is here going forward with all of these with all these unknowns at the same time. You are listening to the Risk Advisor podcast, hosted by myself, Jim Henry, and Sal Lafreri. We invite you to comment on our blog at theriskadvisor.com and subscribe and follow us on our social media. If you are interested in having one or both of us speak at an upcoming event or would like to consult with us, please go to our webpage at theriskadvisor.com to set that up. I guess we're kind of already getting into this. How do you see, comments that I was making and Sal was making, how do you see private security in the next 10 years? Do you see, a long-term effect of this defunding the police, or short-term, do you see that this, reversing itself when people realize, this is, the problem we had is better than the problem that we're heading toward? Is there any way to forecast that at this point? Or are we too close to the forest to see the trees right now?
I think 10 years is a long time to try to predict, what changes are going to take place. I would see the advent of technology continuing to positively impact security, right? And being able to understand in a physical security how to array resources. I would say continued crisis planning and partnerships will be critical in being able to make sure that folks are getting the right perspective from across industry. I would say the public-private partnerships between federal government and the private sector will continue to mature. Remember, in the information age that we're in right now, it's not just our citizens that are putting things on social media. You have countries like China, Russia, and Iran fanning the flames of discontent via social media. So it is something that we'll have to continue to grapple with. I would say the advent of being able to move information, intelligence at the speed of technology will continue to be a forefront for companies across industry.
So go ahead, Sal.
I was just going to say one of the things that Allied puts out, and one of the things that you're responsible for with Allied, is the intelligence bulletin, which you guys do a phenomenal job with. And I think you get a lot of great information out of it, and you kind of chunk all of that information down, and it gives it to you in a quick and fast synopsis. Because as we all know, there's so much stuff that we have to read during the course of the day or during the course of the week that, just give it to me in the bullet points. And you guys do a great job with that. And one of the things that I noticed in the last one we were talking in the preparation for Civil Disobedience, there was a thing in there that caught my eye. And I said, I got to ask him. If I get him on the show, I got to ask him about it. Talking about the medical training. Where with the protests and the issues that we've been facing, the fact that you wind up with the potential of having a delay in an EMS response, and that you pretty much got to take care of it. You can't have just a box of Band-Aids anymore. That you need to have a little bit more medical training. And I said, love to hear a little bit more about that and how that made it into the plan. With a report.
Sure. So one of the things that we do, and we touched on it earlier, is a critical incident response team within a corporation on a campus for a group of buildings, for an individual building, and having those resources on site. One of the aspects that Allied will evaluate is, do you want to have somebody with a higher level of medical training that can tend to not just those folks that may be caught in more of a ruckus, a civil unrest, where that would be critical, but also as a part of your security apparatus in a day-to-day routine operation where you have a medic on site, and that really mitigates the risk for a corporation when somebody might be under medical distress and resources across a city or a county are strained. What does that do for you, the client, in that apparatus and having somebody on site? To me, in some regards, it's almost a no-brainer that you wouldn't want to have a medical. When I say a medical professional, I'm clearly not meaning a doctor, but an EMT, a nurse that's there that can respond in just a routine manner. and help in that type of professional. It kind of falls into not just that, but our fire life safety and in a program like that, and during times of, again, distress that may not just be the violence of the protest with us, but just in the daily life, or maybe even just during a fire, a potential fire problem, or even a drill. We have folks that have medical issues.
It's all true. The technology obviously has been changing over the years. We've been getting, more and better technology, right? We've gone, officers now have, security professionals have the information in their hand. You guys came out with a program called Helios. How are you utilizing technology today to improve the service?
You broke up a little bit. What do I see coming out that's going to improve the service?
So, see, technology obviously is advancing, and we're deploying more and more technology over time. Officers now have the capability to walk around with smartphones in their hand and be able to deploy technology to assist them in their job. Helios, I believe, is one of the programs you guys have and you use. How do you see that technology deploying? What are some of the benefits? So if a security director is thinking about deploying that type of technology, what's the advantages to it?
Oh, there's huge advantages to the deployment of Helios, right? Just, we start with the safety aspects where you have analytic elements, AI, being able to help mitigate risks from just a safety feature across a corporate campus, an industry where you're being able to aggregate and look at those things in a specific location with the details necessary to realize these things are, slips and falls in this location have cost us this much. It's happened this many times, and this is the analysis behind it. I would also say that integrating the human reporting element into an intelligence apparatus is critical, and being able to push that information at the speed of technology to be able to shift resources in the time of crisis to inform your security professionals at the speed of technology is invaluable. Of
course, the ability to shift the resources is invaluable if you're shifting them in the right direction, which is why you really have to be careful about, the deep fakes and the decoys. When we you talked about the bad actors, both foreign and domestic, they're having a field day watching us chase rainbows or anything that's thrown out there, trying to get a reaction. And the way that we're jumping at this stuff, without it being vetted first is creating an additional and unnecessary vulnerability.
I think that sometimes it's important. It's really hard, but sometimes it's important to take a step back. I think everybody needs to, generally realize the first report is always wrong, right? Because you don't have all the facts. It's the initial report. Now, how do you provide the right response that is measured, but also providing the right amount of emphasis behind what could be a bad actor, a bad scene, a crisis event, knowing that there's going to be more information coming? I'll give you a great example. Boston bombing. The initial report was that a coil blew in Boston. That was the initial report I got in. So how are we vetting that, and what else happened? Of course, it very quickly became what we now know today. So things happen. Car backfires. A furnace blows. Is that making a terrorist event? But in today's environment, we're predisposed because of all the bad things. So how do we provide the right resources? What is reporting? Who's on scene? And how do they move that information to a chief security officer, to a business leader at that speed of technology because they're on scene? What other things are going on in my area? What else is going on across the United States? What threat information has been already posted related to my business that could have been negatively impacting that? All of those factors should go into a crisis management planning and reporting as standard operating procedure.
Well, I know in the city, one of the things that they had to do is actually create a rumor desk. And what that was doing was, as the information was coming in, so actually looking through it and saying, is it fact, is it fiction? If it's a rumor, I got to stop the rumor, and then being able to put messaging out to dispel the rumor. Which, as you well know, in the middle of a crisis, the last thing you want to do is have to take time and resources to try and dispel the rumor. But if you don't, it just accelerates the crisis that you're dealing with. So it's one of those necessary evils that you have to contend with.
You absolutely have to contend with, and you have to be very careful, because there could be a kernel of truth in some of this reporting that may add to the puzzle, and it's difficult. It's a challenge today in today's security environment.
It's true. So we got a couple of minutes left. Well, I do want to just get one last good point and get in. CSOs, CEOs, private companies, they have to deal with a lot of large-scale, unusual events, right? We've had the pandemics, we've had national social unrest, some riots, some natural disasters, which seems to take a backseat to everything these days. It almost makes you want for a natural disaster, right? But how do security companies, and specifically Allied, help your clients prepare for the unexpected?
Well, I think there's an element to looking across industry and taking best practices. And so our consultants, our teams in our threat, disaster, and emergency response, our security consultants, our executive protection, and our intelligence apparatus, looking across industry so that we can bring that perspective to a client, right? It may not be happening in your industry. It may be happening someplace else. And so how does that impact your business and your risk calculus? What is the risk matrix in your company, and how does that fall into the prioritization if these things were to happen? You haven't seen them. Where does that happen? High risk, low likelihood, and just a simplistic matrix of some of those things. But it's important to understand that as you go in. I do think having a cross-industry perspective adds that value, and having somebody that focuses on it every day with it is a value to those clients who are often consumed with their own day-to-day activity. So having that objective third-party view is valuable. I think being able to bring in the resources of those expertise to aid a client in providing those objectives in a team environment is hugely important. And that capitalized with threaded through intelligence and the intelligence platforms or information platforms that we have, also helping inform clients on how they would conduct or calculate risk and mitigation in their specific vertical. Lastly, training. Going through crisis management training, evaluating your policies, procedures is, I think, more critical today than ever before. And I wouldn't say a constant evaluation, but being able to take that time to look at policies, procedures, and on a recurring basis to see if it is sufficiently mitigating the risks that you were intending to do when the policies were written.
Lastly, someone wants to get in touch with you, get to see the reports that you're putting out, sign up for some service. How do they reach you?
So they can reach me, my email, joshua.skule@aus.com, and we'll get them situated with anything that Allied has to offer.
Sounds good. Jim, final thoughts before I wrap this up?
I think the point that Joshua made here, about the training is really critical, because as these tactics change, the training is going to change. And I think both on the public side and on the private side, as was evidenced, with that tragic shooting where the one officer, mistook, the gun for the taser, and vice versa. Training has to be an element of that. So if there's one positive, to come out of all of what we're going through now, is if there is a recognition that, all these people on the public and private side are human beings, and they can make mistakes and they can fail. Well, the only way to mitigate that is with good training. So I really do hope that's a good takeaway.
I agree.
Sounds good. Well, Joshua, once again, thank you so much for being with us, taking some time. We really appreciate it. Definitely, we are going to want to ask you to come back. We got a couple of other issues and shows that we would like to be able to talk about. So we're going to ask you to come back. So I'm going to put you on the spot and just let you know we're asking you to come back. So
even though I told you, thank you.
Even though I told you I won't put you on the spot, I'm just going to tell you.
No, enjoyable time, and please let me know how and when I can come back and what topics you guys would like to cover.
Sounds good. All right. You've been listening to the Risk Advisor podcast hosted by Jim Henry and me, Sal LaFreri. We're going to ask you to subscribe to the show and like us on our social media sites. We remind you and ask you if you're interested in having one or both of us speak at an upcoming event or would like us to consult. Please go to the webpage at theriskadvisor.com and set that up. Remember, you can hear the show on your favorite podcast platform, YouTube, and of course, stream it at theriskadvisor.com. Thanks again for listening, and we hope you tune in next week.